Our story begins not in America, not in a courtroom, but inside a cold, dark Russian prison. A young man named Frank Abagnale Jr. sits behind bars. He's weak, pale, and in terrible condition. But Frank isn't just another prisoner. He's one of the greatest con men the world has ever seen. Standing outside his cell is FBI agent Carl Hanratty, the man who has chased Frank across countries and oceans. Carl has come to finally bring him back to the United States. As Carl speaks to him, Frank suddenly clutches his chest and collapses. At first, Carl thinks it's another trick. After all, Frank is a master manipulator. But then Carl sees the pain in his face and realizes no one could fake it this well. He rushes Frank to the hospital, but even there, Frank tries to make a run for it. For a moment, it feels like he might slip away again, but the Russian police are faster. They pin him down, and as Frank lies there, defeated, his mind begins to drift back to where it all began. Frank wasn't born a criminal. In fact, he grew up in what looked like a happy family in Bronxville, New York. His father was charming and clever. His mother was elegant and loving. To the outside world, they seemed perfect. But behind closed doors, trouble was brewing. One day, his father took young Frank shopping for a suit. The store was closing, and the clerk refused to help. But Frank's father pulled a clever trick. He pretended to find a necklace, handed it to her, and asked if it belonged to her. Impressed, the clerk let them in. That was Frank's first glimpse of his father's sly charm, a trickster smile that could bend the rules. But life soon came crashing down. His father's business failed after a disastrous tax issue. The government seized their property, money, and car. His father begged the bank for a loan, but no one would help. And in the middle of this storm, Frank's parents divorced. In court, Frank was asked, "Do you want to live with your mother or your father?" For a boy who adored both, the question was unbearable. Watching his family fall apart broke something inside him. One day, Frank simply ran away. With only a checkbook and a few dollars, he decided to survive on his own, no matter what it took. At first, Frank tried to use his father's tricks. He wrote checks he couldn't cover, flashing confidence until the money ran out. But soon hotels and restaurants caught on, and he was left homeless. That's when Frank had an idea. What if he didn't just write checks? What if he created them? This was the 1960s. No high-tech scanners, no online verification. Banks were easy targets for someone bold enough to try. Frank learned how checks were printed, how account numbers worked, and how to manipulate them. His teenage pranks had turned into serious fraud. And with every successful cash-in, Frank felt unstoppable. One day, outside a hotel, Frank noticed something that changed everything. A Pan Am pilot walked by, and everyone, clerks, passengers, even strangers, treated him with deep respect. Pilots were kings of the sky, and that's when Frank thought, why not become one? He posed as a reporter, writing about airline pilots, and tricked Pan Am officials into revealing everything. Where pilots got their uniforms, how they were paid, even how their ID cards looked. Soon, Frank had a crisp Pan Am uniform and a forged ID. Just like that, the teenage gunaway became Captain Frank Williams. As a pilot, he didn't just walk into banks with confidence. He flew for free. He logged over 1 million miles, riding jump seats on more than 250 flights, staying in luxury hotels across 26 countries. Airline staff treated him like royalty. And when a pretty flight attendant crossed his path, Frank used his father's old necklace trick to charm her. To everyone else, he was a professional, maybe even a war hero. No one guessed he was barely 19, but the bigger his scams got, the louder they became. And the FBI started listening. the case landed on the desk of FBI agent Carl Hanratty. Carl was everything Frank wasn't. Serious, disciplined, relentless. From the start, he made it his mission to bring Frank down. But catching Frank wasn't easy. At one point, Carl stormed into Frank's hotel room with a gun. Frank didn't panic. Instead, he acted calm, flashed a fake FBI badge, and convinced Carl he was also part of the investigation. He even handed Carl his wallet as proof. By the time Carl realized it was empty, Frank was long gone. It was humiliating. Carl had been played by a teenager. But if Carl was stubborn, Frank was cunning. Their game of cat and mouse spanned years and continents, with Frank always one step ahead. As Pan Am and banks began tightening their security, Frank knew he had to reinvent himself. His next move? Medicine. He created a fake Harvard medical degree and became Dr. Frank Connors, working at a Georgia hospital. He didn't actually treat patients. Instead, he let the interns do the work, while he supervised with confidence. To everyone else, he seemed brilliant. But there was a problem. One day, an emergency case came in, a child bleeding heavily. Frank froze. He couldn't fake this. So he leaned on the real doctors, complimenting their work and slipping away before anyone noticed his fear. When medicine grew risky, he switched to law. He studied just enough to pass the Louisiana bar exam and worked briefly as a lawyer. At another point, he even posed as a college professor. Each role was a costume, and Frank wore it like a master actor. In a hospital, Frank met Brenda, a kind nurse. For the first time, he felt genuine love. Brenda's father was a lawyer, and Frank charmed his way into the family by pretending to be a lawyer himself. He planned to marry Brenda, to finally settle down. But even in love, Frank couldn't resist the con. On the night of their engagement party, the FBI stormed in. Frank confessed everything to Brenda and begged her to meet him at the airport so they could escape together. She agreed. But when she arrived the next day, she wasn't alone. The FBI was with her. Heartbroken, Frank fled once again. Frank's scheme spread across Europe, where he printed massive amounts of fake checks. But in France, his luck finally ran out. He was arrested and locked in a brutal French prison before being transferred to Sweden and finally to Russia. If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel, Movie Breakdown, for more unbelievable true crime stories.